They say power is about knowing when to hold your cards close. I learned it's about knowing exactly when to lay them down. My name is Jordan Pierce, and for 6 years, I was the kind of employee corporations dream about. The one who says yes before you finish asking. The one who stays late, comes in early. Fixes problems that aren't theirs to fix. I worked in operations management at Meridian Tech Solutions, a mid-sized software company in Austin that specialized in cloud infrastructure, the kind of place that has a foosball table in the break room and calls itself a family right up until they need to cut costs. I was good at my job. No, I was exceptional. I'd streamlined their entire project management system, reduced overhead by 32%, and personally salvaged 3 major client relationships that were circling the drain. My performance reviews read like love letters. My salary did not. But that's not unusual, is it? Being invaluable and underpaid at the same time. It's almost a requirement in corporate America. You prove your worth by accepting less than you're worth. It's a magic trick they teach in business school. My boss was a man named Derek Sutton, 47, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes and a handshake that lasted 2 seconds too long. He'd been with the company for 12 years, rising through the ranks not through competence but through careful political maneuvering, the corporate equivalent of knowing which hands to shake and which knives to sharpen. He was the type who'd praise you in public and sabotage you in private, always making sure his name appeared on your successes while your failures stood alone. I didn't hate him. Hate requires energy, and I was too tired for that. I'd learned to manage him the way you manage difficult weather. Prepare for it, dress appropriately. Don't expect it to change. Then came the email. It was a Friday in July, 3 days before my scheduled vacation. 2 weeks in Costa Rica that I'd planned for 8 months. Paid for, non-refundable. My first real break in 3 years. The confirmation was printed and tucked in my bag. My out-of-office reply was already drafted. The email arrived at 4:37 in the afternoon. Subject line, critical client situation, your assistance required. I knew before I opened it. You always know. Derek's message was brief, almost cheerful in its presumption. The Harriman account, our largest client, worth roughly $4 million annually, was having implementation issues. They needed someone on site immediately. The project was mine. I was the only one who understood the architecture. The client had specifically requested me. It would only be a few days, a week at most. Surely I could postpone my vacation. The company would make it up to me. Perhaps a bonus, perhaps future considerations, perhaps nothing concrete enough to mean anything. I sat there for a long moment, watching the cursor blink on my screen. Around me, the office was already emptying out, people eager to start their weekends. Through my window, I could see the Austin skyline turning gold in the late afternoon light. It was beautiful. I barely noticed. I'd been here before. Not this exact situation, but close enough. The last-minute request. The emergency that was somehow always my emergency. The subtle implication that saying no would mark you as not a team player, not committed, not the kind of person who advances in this company, the quiet punishment that follows boundary setting. But this time was different. This time, I'd prepared. 3 months earlier, during my annual review, I'd negotiated something into my contract. It wasn't about salary. I'd asked for a raise and been denied, told that budgets were tight, that the company was going through a difficult quarter, that I needed to be patient. What I got instead was a clause, a small addition to my employment agreement that HR had barely glanced at before approving. It stated in precise legal language that any termination of my employment without cause would result in a severance package equal to 18 months of salary, plus the immediate vesting of all stock options, plus continuation of benefits, plus a non-disparagement agreement that worked both ways. It was comprehensive, it was ironclad, and most importantly, it defined without cause very specifically. I'd worked with a lawyer on the wording. Cost me $2,000 I didn't really have, but I'd learned something about corporate America. They'll take everything you give them and then ask for more. The only way to protect yourself is to make it expensive to hurt you. I read Derek's email again, then I wrote my response. Derek, I appreciate you thinking of me for this situation. However, as discussed during my review cycle, I will not be available during my scheduled vacation time, which begins Monday. I'm confident the team can handle the Harriman situation, and I've prepared comprehensive documentation for any implementation questions that might arise. I'll be completely offline during my time away. Best of luck with the resolution. I hit send before I could reconsider. Then I packed my bag and went home. The response came at 6:15. I was in my apartment halfway through a glass of wine that tasted like courage and regret mixed together. Jordan, I don't think you understand the gravity of this situation. This isn't a request. This is a business necessity. Harriman has made it clear that if we don't resolve this immediately, they're considering terminating the contract. I need you to put the company first here. We can discuss rescheduling your vacation when this crisis is resolved. There it was. The shift from request to demand, the invocation of company loyalty, the unstated threat. I typed my response slowly, letting each word settle into place like stones in a wall. Derek, I understand the situation. My vacation time is contractual and was approved 3 months ago. I've fulfilled all my obligations prior to this leave. I'm not available to work during this period. I'm sure you'll find a solution. This time, the response took longer, 43 minutes. When it came, it wasn't from Derek. It was from Monica Chen, head of HR. Jordan, please call me immediately. We need to discuss this situation. Monica was 51, with perfect posture and a voice like brushed steel. She'd been with Meridian for 8 years, and in that time, I'd watched her master the art of corporate cruelty disguised as concern. She could fire someone while making them feel grateful for the opportunity. She could deny your raise while praising your dedication. She was very, very good at her job. I didn't call. Instead, I sent an email. Monica, I'm afraid there's nothing to discuss. My vacation was approved and begins Monday. I've completed all my deliverables and provided documentation for the team. I'll be unreachable during this time. See you when I return. The weekend was quiet. Too quiet. I kept checking my email, even though I'd told myself I wouldn't. Nothing came. Radio silence. It felt ominous, like the stillness before weather changes. Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake, wondering if I'd be walking into the office on my return to find my desk cleaned out, my access revoked, my career at Meridian over, wondering if standing up for myself was worth what it might cost. But Monday morning, I was on a plane to Costa Rica. I turned my phone off during takeoff, didn't turn it back on for 3 days. When I finally checked my messages, there were 17 from work. 6 from Derek, increasingly frantic. 4 from Monica, progressively colder. 3 from IT saying my system access had been suspended. 2 from colleagues asking if I was okay. 1 from our CEO, Richard Ashford, asking me to call him directly. And 1 from Derek with the subject line, termination of employment. I was sitting on a beach when I read it. The sun was setting, turning the ocean into liquid copper. Somewhere nearby, people were laughing. The air smelled like salt and sunscreen, and the particular freedom that comes from being far away from everything familiar. The email was formal, professional, cold. It stated that due to my refusal to fulfill critical job responsibilities and failure to act in the company's best interests, my employment was being terminated immediately, effective the date of the email. My final paycheck would be processed within 2 weeks. I was to return all company property. I was not to contact clients or colleagues. There was a severance offer, 2 weeks of pay, contingent on signing a release that absolved the company of any liability and prevented me from saying anything negative about Meridian, ever. 2 weeks. For 6 years of exceptional service. For every late night, every weekend, every vacation I'd cut short before this. 1. For all the times I'd said yes when I should have said no. I read it twice. Then I ordered another drink and opened my laptop. The response I composed wasn't angry. Anger would have been unprofessional, and more importantly, it would have been weak. What I wrote was precise, factual, and very, very expensive for them. Monica and Derek, I acknowledge receipt of the termination notification. However, I must point out that this termination does not meet the standards of for-cause termination as defined in my employment contract, Section 4.2, which I've attached for your reference. My refusal to work during approved vacation time does not constitute a failure to fulfill job responsibilities, as vacation time is a contractual benefit, and I completed all assigned work prior to my leave. Therefore, this termination is without cause as defined in Section 4.3 of my contract. Per the terms of that section, I'm entitled to 18 months of severance at my current salary rate, immediate vesting of all stock options granted during my employment, continuation of health benefits for 18 months, and a mutual non-disparagement agreement. I expect to receive the severance agreement reflecting these terms within 5 business days. I've copied my attorney on this email for your reference. I hope we can resolve this amicably. I hit send. Then I went back to the beach. The silence lasted 2 days. I imagine those were busy days at Meridian. I imagine Derek sitting in Monica's office, both of them sitting in Richard's office. I imagine them calling the company's legal counsel. I imagine someone pulling my contract, really reading it this time, and realizing what they'd approved 3 months ago without paying attention. I imagine the moment they understood, they'd made a very expensive mistake. The email came from Richard Ashford himself. No subject line, just my name. Jordan, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Let's talk when you're back from vacation. I'm sure we can work this out. There's no need for lawyers. We value you and want you to stay with Meridian. Call me when you get this. I didn't respond, not immediately. I let it sit for 24 hours while I swam in the ocean and ate fresh fish and slept without an alarm for the first time in years. I let them wonder. I let them worry. When I finally replied, it was brief. Richard, I appreciate the message. However, I've already received written termination of my employment. That decision was made without my input and appears to be final. I'm simply asking that the company honor the contractual terms we agreed to. My attorney will be in touch to facilitate the severance process. I wish Meridian all the best. Professional, courteous, immovable. What followed was predictable in its desperation. Derek sent an email apologizing, saying he'd acted hastily, that he'd been under stress, that he'd jumped the gun. Monica sent one saying HR was reviewing the situation. Richard sent two. More asking me to please call him, please come in for a meeting, please give them a chance to make this right. I responded to none of them. There was nothing to discuss. They'd shown me exactly who they were, who they'd always been, and I'd finally stopped pretending I didn't see it. My attorney handled the rest. His name was James Keller, 62, with the kind of patient ruthlessness that comes from 40 years of corporate law. He'd helped me draft the contract clause, and now he was going to help me enforce it. The negotiations took 3 weeks. Meridian tried everything, claiming the clause was unenforceable, arguing that my refusal constituted insubordination, suggesting we settle for less. James rejected it all with the kind of polite firmness that made them understand they had no leverage. I had it in writing. They'd approved it. They'd terminated me without cause. The law was clear. In the end, they paid. 18 months of salary, $270,000. Stock options worth another $90,000 after vesting. Benefits continuation. And the non-disparagement agreement, which meant they couldn't badmouth me, and I couldn't badmouth them. Everyone gets to pretend it was amicable. The check arrived on a Tuesday. I deposited it on Wednesday. On Thursday, I got a call from a recruiter about a position at one of Meridian's competitors. The salary was 40% higher than what I'd been making. They wanted me to start immediately. I did. Turns out, when you value yourself, other people start to notice. When you set boundaries, you teach people how to treat you. When you prepare for the worst, you're never surprised by it. I ran into Derek 6 months later at an industry conference in Denver. He was standing at the bar, looking older than I remembered. His smile was still the same, tight, nervous, not quite reaching his eyes. He saw me and hesitated, clearly unsure whether to approach or pretend he hadn't noticed. I made it easy for him. I walked over. Derek, Jordan, hi, how are you? I'm well, you? He nodded too quickly. Good, good, things are busy. You know how it is. I did know. I knew that after I left, the Harriman account had been lost anyway. I knew that 2 other key clients had followed within 3 months. I knew that Meridian stock had dropped 18%. I knew that Derek had been demoted, not fired. Companies like Meridian rarely fire people like Derek. They just move them sideways until they leave on their own. I knew all of this because corporate circles are small, and people talk, and information flows like water, finding the lowest point. I heard you landed somewhere good, he said. He was trying to sound casual. It came out envious. I did. I'm enjoying it. There was a pause. He took a drink, looked at me over the rim of his glass. Look, Jordan, about how things ended, it's fine, Derek. I was under a lot of pressure. The board was pushing. Harriman was threatening. I made some calls I shouldn't have made. I could have let him off easy, could have nodded and agreed and moved on, could have accepted the apology he wasn't quite giving. Instead, I smiled. The same smile I'd learned from watching him all those years. You made exactly the calls you meant to make. You always do. You just didn't expect me to make you pay for them. His face went carefully blank. Corporate neutral. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It's accurate. There's a difference. I left him at the bar, didn't look back. Looking back is how you trip over what you've already left behind. 3 years have passed since then. I'm director of operations now, at a company that values work-life balance as more than a line in the employee handbook. I make 3 times what Meridian paid me. I take my vacations. All of them. I've learned to say no without guilt, and yes, without resentment. I've learned that loyalty is a transaction, not a virtue. That companies will take everything you give them and then ask why you didn't give more. that the only person responsible for protecting your value is you. I still have the contract, the original one with the clause that saved me. It's framed in my office now, behind my desk. Not as a trophy, as a reminder that power isn't about how much you can endure. It's about knowing exactly what you're worth and making sure everyone else knows it too. Derek's email is in there too, the termination notice. I look at it sometimes when I need to remember why boundaries matter, why preparation matters, why standing up for yourself, even when it's terrifying, is the only way to live with the person you see in the mirror. They thought I'd fold. They'd seen me fold before, every time they asked for more, every time they took advantage, every time I prioritized their needs over my own. They'd trained me to be compliant, and they couldn't imagine I'd learned a different language. But I had. Slowly, quietly, I'd been studying the rules they thought I didn't understand. I'd been building my exit while they thought I was building my career. The thing about corporate America is that it runs on the assumption that employees need the company more than the company needs them. It's usually true, but not always. And when you can make yourself the exception, when you can make it more expensive to lose you than to keep you, when you can walk away from something that's hurting you, that's when you stop being an employee and start being a person who happens to work. I got a LinkedIn message last month from someone at Meridian, a young woman, 26, asking if I had time for coffee. She wanted career advice. She was in operations, working under Derek's replacement. She was feeling undervalued, overworked, unsure if she should stay or go. We met at a cafe in downtown Austin. She reminded me of myself 6 years ago, talented, dedicated, slowly being ground down by a system that mistakes exhaustion for excellence. I told her my story, not the sanitized version, the real one, the fear, the calculation, the moment I decided my dignity was worth more than my paycheck. I told her about the clause. "Can you help me?" she asked. "With my contract? I have my review coming up." I smiled. The kind of smile that means yes, but also means this is going to cost them. "I know a good lawyer," I said, "because here's what they don't tell you in business school, in orientation, in all those motivational posters about teamwork and dedication. The company is not your family. Your boss is not your friend. Your loyalty will be rewarded right up until it becomes inconvenient. And the only protection you have is the protection you build yourself." I finished my coffee, watched her write down James Keller's number, saw the same determination in her eyes that I'd felt sitting on that beach in Costa Rica, reading my termination email, realizing I'd prepared for exactly this moment. "One more thing," I said as we stood to leave. "When they try to make you feel guilty for setting boundaries, remember this. They fired you for taking a vacation. They didn't feel guilty about that. You don't owe them yours." She nodded, thanked me, walked out into the Austin sunshine, looking like someone who'd just learned she had options. I watched her go, and something in me settled, some old anger I didn't know I was still carrying. Revenge doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be obvious. Sometimes it's just teaching someone else how to protect themselves. Sometimes it's watching a system that hurt you fail to hurt someone else the same way. Sometimes it's knowing that the clause you fought for, the boundary you set, the price you made them pay, it matters, not just for you, for everyone who comes after. I walked back to my office, past the foosball table we actually use, past the conference room where my boss asks, not demands, past the windows that look out over a city full of people learning the same lesson I learned, some faster than others. My contract sits behind my desk. The frame catches the light sometimes, and when it does, I remember what it felt like to stand on that beach and realize I'd won, not by fighting harder, but by playing smarter. They wanted me to be grateful for crumbs. I taught them to pay for the whole meal. That's not revenge. That's just knowing your worth and making sure the check clears. And somewhere in this city, in offices just like the one I left, there are other people learning the same thing, reading their contracts, consulting lawyers, building their exits, getting ready to stand up the next time someone tries to make them small. The difference between being used and being valued is often just a single clause. The difference between being disposable and being protected is knowing which battles to prepare for before they start. I learned that lesson on a beach in Costa Rica, holding a termination email in one hand and a margarita in the other, watching the sun set on a job that thought it owned me. They were wrong, and that wrongness cost them $270,000, plus stock options, plus benefits, plus the kind of lesson you can't unlearn. Some people call it being difficult. I call it being expensive to underestimate. And in the end, that's the only language they understand.